Hi everybody, I'm Roy Petitfils, and I am making this video to help answer a question that I get asked quite a lot, which is I'm thinking about getting into psychology, counseling, therapy, mental health, and I want to help people, maybe even Catholic families, Catholic young people. What are my options? And so this video is specifically for someone who asked me the question. I want to help Catholic families, and I am getting a degree in psychology. And so this is going to be fairly, I think, universal, whether you're getting your LPC, LMSW, social work degree, or if you want to go the psychology route, getting licensed through the American Psychological Association. And I want to help Catholic families. So specifically, what can I do with my degree that might be of help to Catholic families? So by way of answering that, let me just perhaps answer kind of my track and how I have gone forth and how I discerned it. One, I did a lot of research. I talked to as many LPCs as I could find, psychologists. I talked even to a couple of psychiatrists, even a couple of social workers, including a number of professors. For me, that was limited to the University of Louisiana, Lafayette. And so I just asked a whole bunch of questions, very practical considerations in terms of how do I provide for my family, how much education do I need, what are my options after I get out of grad school in terms of using my degree. One, in terms of helping people, and secondarily in terms of actually making a living for my family. I was moving from education and ministry into the field of, I knew one day was going to most likely be private practice. So for me, my interest was in combining the psychological and social sciences with the language of philosophy and theology and religion. And so that was kind of my passion. How can I bring these two together? For so long, especially for me, when I was in seminary studying to be a priest, these were two competing disciplines that really didn't speak very easily to one another, much less use a shared language in order to help people. And so for me, as a writer, as a communicator, as a speaker, that was one of my interests in going into studying the social sciences, specifically getting a master's in counseling, and now today working in private practice. But the counseling piece is part of what I do, but I also have a teaching component to my ministry as well. So, and I don't know that I could ever do one or the other, even though most days I feel compelled to do one or the other because that would be a lot easier, to be perfectly honest. But they feed into one another. I feel like what I learn here in my office in practice, I feel like I have to teach it, whether that's through writing, through podcasts, or going out on the road and speaking. And today, I primarily work with adolescents, though that is brings me into the family system. And I never see the adolescent, as a teenager. I see them within the context of their family system, however functional or dysfunctional, that might be. And so that's a good bit of work that I do with regard to Catholic families. I also, speak a good bit to parents, and helping parents to understand teenagers, give them tools to communicate more effectively with their teenagers. I write a good bit. I blog, I podcast. But, what are the options out there for somebody who wants to go and get a graduate level degree in mental health, some aspect of mental health, whether it's through the social work track, the medical psychiatric track, which would be obviously med school. And I'm not going to address that because that has its own limited set of options, good options, but I'm not as familiar. I'm familiar, but there are tons of subtracks within the MD route, which is what a psychiatrist is. But I'm much more familiar with licensing through the APA, which would be PsyDs, PhDs, in psychology, or counselors, which would be the LPC track, or the LMSWs, LCSWs, I'm sorry. and as well as the LMFTs. So, if you were to, get marriage and family therapy training, clinical training, then that's certainly one thing that you could do with families in terms of actually doing therapy, and doing family therapy, which I think is only going to be more needed in the upcoming years as we grow more individualized, we get more addicted to our screens, and we're talking more to screens and less to one another. I think anyone who can build the rapport and be a safe place and create sacred space and safe places for the family system and individual members individually and collectively for the family system, I think they're going to be very valuable and provide a real important service to Catholic families. I think that teaching is something that can be very valuable. Psychoeducation, those are definitely options that are on the table. It can be through private practice. It could also be through consulting. My particular bent is, I teach what I know, and I'm not opposed to teaching theory, and I had several professors who spent very little who taught counseling, who spent very little time in the counseling room. In my first 2 years as a therapist, I probably logged in more hours, real hours in terms of private practice than they had probably in the last 15 or 20 years. Not all of them, but I know I had a couple. And they were good teachers. They taught the theory really well, and I needed that information. But for me, I think what gives credibility to my teaching is the fact that I'm practicing it every day. And in the family system, especially with teenagers, that the culture is shifting, their language is shifting, the trends are shifting and developing so rapidly today. I would find it almost impossible to spend more than probably a few months out of practice being in the trenches with teens and their families and having anything really credible to say. It doesn't, my credibility doesn't come from my confidence that I have on stage or, because I'm feigning that confidence, is because I know what I'm talking about because I did it yesterday. So, I think that there's a huge value for that in the Catholic market. Practitioners, training ministers, I think is one of the things that I'm doing, and one of the things that there's going to be a growing need for. Which is training ministers how to deal with, and we call it pastoral care, how to deal with issues in the family system, how to help work with families, not necessarily doing therapy, but what therapy skills can we give them that can empower them to do the ministry that they are doing, right? And so on our end, I learned the ministry skills first, and then came later on and added the therapeutic and the clinical expertise on top of it. But I think that we have a responsibility, and I think the churches are more open to the clinical professionals coming in and saying, hey, you know what, I know you've only been able to get here, but we can offer you and teach you some skills and train you in some skills and some practices that might be able to help you get here. Certainly not going to replace one another, but I think, how can we help work with one another? So that's just from my limited, vantage point. But there are countless options out there, to be able to share your faith and combine your faith with the psychological sciences and clinical practice. Those are the ways I do it. I know others who do it more, implicitly. I'm rather explicit in how I do it, fairly open. I think primarily because of my teaching, and I work in a center that is, we make no apologies for our Catholic Christian biases, and we disclaim those very heavily. But I know a lot of folks who do it more implicitly. They just bring their faith to bear in their practice in whatever they do. Now, the psychologists who are licensed through the APA have more options in terms of assessment. So, while we can do more clinical work, we can work in schools, LPCs, LCSWs, school counselors, etc. Psychologists can do all of that. They can be a school psychologist, but they can also do assessments. They can do psychological testing, which is invaluable. I work very closely with quite a few psychologists, specifically child psychologists, who can do advanced assessments, who, if I'm looking up here from the helicopter view, they can get down on the ground, and like they're trekking through the forest of the adolescent soul and mind and heart, and evaluate some more intricate things and make some finer distinctions. And so they can do that. So I think that that's another option available to psychologists. But I think that the options are endless. I'm a big believer in Thoreau's quote, when he says, "If one advances confidently in the direction of his own dreams and endeavors to live a life which only he has imagined, he or she will meet with a success that is unimaginable in common hours," meaning in that day. And so, 10 years ago, no, 15 years ago, I had the dream of doing exactly what I'm doing today. And there wasn't anybody doing it the way I wanted to do it, and yet I'm doing it. So I would strongly encourage you, if you can dream it, if you can envision it, then you can most likely find a way to make it happen. Maybe not exactly the way you imagine it, but chances are it'll be as good, if not better, in the outcome. Hopefully this was helpful. You can definitely reach out to me, Roy at roypetitfils.com or Roy at today'steenager.com. Would love to hear your thoughts and any further questions that I might be able to answer more explicitly, even in another video. Have a great day. Thanks for watching.